2024 was an amazing year for video games, and not just games that came out this year, not for me, although I played plenty of those. I also dug into a lot of games in my backlog and played a ton of games with my daughter. So many memories were made this year digging through RPGs, digging through indie gems, games that were not on my radar when we came into 2024, but they sure were as we left. And having amazing experiences with friends, digging into games that I'd always wanted to play and never did, either because I was playing other things when those games came out, or simply I didn't know those games existed. It was a wonderful year to share gaming experiences with friends. Or even games that were more cinematic and beautiful, lush, amazing graphical showcases than games. Things that stood out from an artistic level that I just couldn't shake as I moved through the year. Video games are so diverse and so beautiful and so interesting. It's such an amazing art form, such an amazing hobby, but it's, in the end, something that I love sharing with people. Playing through Kirby with my daughter and my wife this year was such an amazing experience, bringing the family together. And it wasn't the only game that I played with my family, and it wasn't the only game that I played on the Switch. My daughter and I were so excited that Princess Peach was getting her own game, her own showcase, and we spent quite a bit of time roaming around as our favorite princess. But there are also those gaming moments that I had on my own, things that I would not share with my daughter.
He's gone somewhere I'll never see him again.
Metaphor being one of them. And this was a game that I only played the demo of. I loved the demo, the story-rich, foot forward that Metaphor presented, and the step up from Persona 5 for me. It was nice not to be in a high school. There's so much to dig into here. But I didn't just play games that were story-rich from 2024. I dug into games from the past, playing Yakuza for the first time. Yakuza 0 here, introducing me to Kiryu and what this story was all about. And then bouncing forward to this game and Ichiban's story. The character moments, the strength of your party, and just the wackiness. Really, that's always stood out from the Yakuza games that I've heard about but never experienced, and got to experience for the first time this year. It's incredible how weird but so endearing this series is. Of course, other surprise hits from the year, something like Pal World. Not exactly my jam, but I dug in and checked it out. Had a good time wrangling up some monsters, but didn't stick around too long. But it was certainly part of my journey this year. This is another demo that I played this year, Unicorn Overlord. It was something I played in March of this year. I love tactical games. I'd never played a Vanillaware game before, and this was the first one I checked out. Played the full demo. Ended up purchasing the collector's edition of the game, but I don't know if I was worried, but I did not open it. I didn't want to crack the seal, so it's still in the case, but I need to get back to this. But the 8-hour demo was such a sweet treat. This one stands out to me as the game that got away. Such an amazing mechanic for a roguelike card game using poker. I played the demo, thought about picking it up for Fantasy Critic, but I didn't like the texture of the background. To be honest, I thought it's not gonna score well. And what a fool I was judging this by a bit of its cover. Balatro was an incredible experience for everybody this year. This game was not one that came out this year. Slay the Princess came out in 2023, but I only played it this year and played through a couple iterations of the story, digging through this dev team's story-rich gameplay. Another story-rich game that I dug into for the first time this year was Super Mario RPG, something that I'd always heard about, and the remaster provided the perfect opportunity for me to dig in, and my daughter played this game with me the whole time and just was enamored. We played from start to finish together. But we get into the games that I am ranking now. All those games that I played were amazing, but at the end of the year, I feel like I've got to rank my top 5 like I normally do, and this one, 1,000 Times Resist, stuck with me throughout the year. Picked it up in the summer. Of course, people were talking about it, but the story, the touching on themes of pandemic, touching on themes of diaspora, and this visual novel sort of walking simulator where you are viewing copies of one of the only people to survive the pandemic, and how those iterations evolve into their own personalities, their own conflicts, their own complicated relationships, and you are communing with each other and digging into each other's memories and the memory of the All-Mother, the original, and how their parents survived protest, survived autocracy, and what gets passed down to the next generation, these sacrifices that I made for you so that you could persist, so that you could resist. I'm not a huge fan of sci-fi settings such as these, but something about this game and this story hooked me from beginning to end, so it's number 5 on my list. Number 4 is UFO 50. And UFO 50 for me is just such an achievement. It's 50 games, as though they were released on in the 80s on old pixelated pixel graphic systems. And the games evolve over time. There are several iterations of some of the games where you can see the evolution of the game studio, the evolution of game design. One of my favorite things is to move from like the first game that you find in the collection, Barbuda, which is a very reminiscent of Faxanadu for me, like a really old school RPG that is just obtuse and hard to figure out. And then as you move through the collection, the games get crisper, they get easier to play and more familiar, and just such an achievement. It's just a huge game jam come to life, and that's why it's number 4 on my list. Number 3, the game that I had the most laughs with this year, despite having played Thank Goodness You're Here, was Helldivers 2. I fired this up with my friends for about 30 hours towards the beginning of the year, and just couldn't stop playing and couldn't stop laughing. We had a crew of 4, and the hijinks we got into, the amount of times that we dropped weapons, dropped capsules, hell dove on top of each other's heads, just the amount of times that we absolutely screwed up the mission in the most hilarious ways, barely escaping with our lives when that drop ship to come get us out finally came. The game was meant to be played in multiplayer, obviously, with your friends, but the game was meant to just mess things up and get out by the skin of your teeth and improvise. And so much of this game was about improvising, succeeding despite yourselves and despite the odds. And it's a gaming memory I will always cherish with my friends. Number 2 is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and this one is a late charger onto my list. I had begun playing it around May. I played Remake for the first time this year and fell in love with the characters and wanted to continue the story. And started playing Rebirth. I played for like 40 hours, and the story was still there, the characters were still there, but there is so much bloat to the world, the open world, which is where you move into in this part of Final Fantasy VII story. But the bloat was so much that it sagged the story. It sagged the pacing. And around chapter 8 or 9, I just petered out and put it away for a while, and eventually came back and tried to just critical path mainline and get to the story again right around chapter 10. And that's when it started singing, and I couldn't put it down for the last 2 or 3 weeks. So it was a game that was not on my top 5, crept into my top 5, and the more that I played, overtook Helldivers 2 to become my number 2 game of the year. The combat is engaging. The story moments when they come hit hard. There is certainly a bit of sloppiness at the end with the multiverse movement in the story, and the way that Aerith comes and her story comes at the end doesn't hit as hard as the original, and that sucks. Like, that heartbreak isn't quite there. It's more confusion. What's happening with Aerith? What's happening with Cloud? But there are so many moments where I fall in love with these characters. I fell in love with Tifa. I fell in love with Aerith by the end. And just trying to move through the story, work with all of the systems in the game, the synergy, the materia, party composition. There's so much richness to the game. There's so much richness to the systems. And this is another one that stands out to me as playing with somebody, because my podcast partner, the dev, jumped back into this at the same time that I did, and we beat it within 24 hours of each other and found so much to love in the discussion about what the hell happened at the end here, what's coming next. Final Fantasy VII is absolutely a special game in my heart, and I was so glad to have come back to Rebirth and stuck with it till the end, and it's found a place on my list. But number 1 on my list is a game that supplanted Mario 3 as my favorite game of all time, and that is something I thought was impossible. Astrobot was incredible because of the way it plays, the movement, the pure joy, the way it looks, the way it sounds, the way it moves, the secrets, the bots, the design. But something that was so special about this was how my family gravitated towards it. Not just me, but my daughter and my wife. My wife is not a gamer. My daughter is. She plays with me a lot, and she's really taken after me in terms of digging into the richness of video games as a hobby. But my wife, not so much. But my daughter convinced my wife to play with her, and she started playing side by side with my daughter. My daughter taught her how to play, and then my wife started doing the speed runs and is now playing her own file, getting through to all the bosses in the story mode. So Astrobot stands out as the game of the year because of how it brought my family together around the joy of gaming, something I'll never forget. Thanks so much for digging into my favorite games of 2024. Appreciate you being here. Looking forward to a very wild 2025.